Mouche, Reminiscences of a Rowing Man by Guy de Maupassant. This is what he told us. I saw some funny things and some funny girls in those days when I used to go boating on the river. Many's the time I've felt like writing a little book called On the Seine, describing that carefree athletic life, a life of poverty and gaiety, of noisy, rollicking fun that I led in my 20s. I was a penniless clerk at the time. Now I'm a successful man who can throw away huge sums to gratify a passing whim. I had 1,000 modest, unattainable desires in my heart which gilded my existence with fantastic hopes. Today I really can't think of anything that would induce me to get out of the armchair where I sit dozing. Though life could be hard, how simple and enjoyable it was to live like that between the office in Paris and the river at Argenteuil. For 10 years my great, my only, my absorbing passion was the Seine, that lovely, calm, varied, stinking river full of mirages and filth. I think I loved it so much because it gave me the feeling of being alive. I think I loved it so much because it gave me the feeling of being alive. Oh, those strolls along the flower-covered banks with my friends, the frogs dreamily cooling their bellies on water-lily leaves, and the frail, dainty lilies among the tall grasses which parted suddenly to reveal a scene from a Japanese album as a kingfisher darted past me like a blue flame. How I loved all that, with an intrinsic passion of the eyes which spread through my whole body in a feeling of deep and natural joy. Just as others remember nights of passion, I cherish memories of sunrises on misty mornings with floating, drifting vapors white as ghosts before the dawn, and then, as the first ray of sunshine touched the meadows lit with a lovely rosy glow. And I cherish memories, too, of the moon silvering with rippling surface of the water with a radiance which brought all my dreams to life. And all that symbol of everlasting illusion was born for me on the foul water which swept all the refuse of Paris down to the sea. Besides, what a gay life we led! There were 5 of us, a small group of friends who are pillars of the community today. As none of us had any money, we had set up an indescribable sort of club in a frightful pothouse at Argenteuil, renting a single dormitory bedroom where I spent what were the maddest nights of my life. We thought about nothing but having fun and rowing, for all of us, with one exception, regarded rowing as a religion. I remember adventures those 5 rascals had and pranks they thought up, which were so fantastic that nobody could possibly believe them today. Nobody behaves like that anymore, even on the Seine, because the crazy fun which was the breath of life to us means nothing to people nowadays. The 5 of us owned a single boat between us, which had cost us enormous trouble to buy, and which gave us more fun than we shall ever have again. It was a yawl, broad to the beam and rather heavy, but solid, roomy, and comfortable. I won't try to describe my friends to you. One of them was a mischievous little chap nicknamed Petit Bleu, and another a tall, wild-looking fellow with grey eyes and black hair whom we called Tomahawk. Then there was a lazy, witty character we nicknamed La Toque, the only one who never touched an oar, on the pretext that he would be sure to capsize the boat. A slim, elegant, well-groomed fellow we called Nakunul Nacanel, after a recently published novel by Cladel, and also because he wore a monocle, and lastly myself, whom others had baptized Joseph Prunier. We lived in perfect harmony, our only regret being that we hadn't a girl to take the tiller. A woman is an indispensable adjunct to a boat like ours, indispensable because she keeps minds and hearts awake, because she provides excitement, amusement, and distraction, because she gives a spice to life, and with a red parasol gliding past green banks, decoration too. But an ordinary coxwoman was no use to us five, who could scarcely be described as ordinary people. We needed somebody unusual, odd, ready for anything. In short, almost impossible to find. We had tried a good many without success, girls who just played at being helmswomen, stupid creatures who were more interested in the light wine that went in their heads than in the water that kept them afloat. We kept them for a single Sunday and then sent them packing in disgust. But then one Saturday evening, Nacanel brought along a lively, skinny little thing who was always hopping and skipping around, a young tease who was full of that skittishness which passes for wit among the street Arabs of both sexes who have grown up on the pavements of Paris. She was a sweet girl, but not really pretty. A rough sketch of a woman with a little of everything in her, one of those silhouettes which artists draw in 3 strokes on a tablecloth in a cafe after dinner between a glass of brandy and a cigarette. Nature sometimes turns out creatures like that. On that first evening she astonished and amused us and was so unpredictable that none of us could make up our minds about her. Landing in the midst of a bunch of men who were ready to get up to any kind of prank, she was soon in command of the situation, and by the next day she had conquered us completely. She was absolutely crazy into the bargain. She told us that she had been born with a glass of absinthe in her belly, which her mother had drunk just before giving birth to her. She had never sobered up since, because she said her nurse used to keep her strength up with tots of rum. She herself always called the bottles lined up on barroom shelves my holy family. I don't know which of us christened her Mouche, nor why that name was given her, but it suited her perfectly, and it stuck to her. So every week our yawl, which was called Folle et leurs vins, I don't know, would travel along the Seine between Asnières and Maisons Lafitte, with a load of 5 light-hearted, strapping young fellows steered by a lively, scatterbrained creature under a parasol of painted paper, who treated us as if we were slaves charged with the duty of taking her for a row, and whom we all adored. We adored her first of all for a variety of reasons, and then for one in particular. She was a sort of little word mill in the stern of our boat, chatting away in the wind blowing over the water. She babbled incessantly with the continuous sound of those winged toys that spin in the breeze, trotting out the most unexpected, amusing, and astonishing things in that mind of hers, which seemed like a patchwork of rags of all kinds and colors, not sewn together but only tacked. There was a fairy-tale fantasy, bawdy immodesty, impudence, jokes and surprises, and a sense of fresh air and scenery such as you would get traveling in a balloon. We used to ask her questions just to hear the far-fetched answers she would produce. The one we fired at her most often was, "Why are you called Mouche?" She thought up such fantastic reasons that we would stop rowing to laugh at them. She appealed to us as a woman too, and Lecoq, who never did any rowing but spent the whole day sitting beside her in the helmsman's seat, once said in reply to the traditional question, "Why are you called Mouche?" "Because she's a little Spanish fly." And that is exactly what she was, a little buzzing, exciting Spanish fly, not the classic poisonous cantharides, shiny and hooded, but a little winged Spanish fly who was beginning to have an oddly disturbing effect on the whole crew of the Folle et leurs vins. What stupid jokes we made about that leaf on which our fly had alighted. Ever since Mouche had joined our crew, Nacanel had taken up his superior, preponderant role among us, the role of a gentleman who has a woman compared with 4 others who have none. He sometimes abused this privilege to the point of exasperating us by kissing Mouche in front of us, perching her on his knees after meals, and assuming all kinds of humiliating and irritating prerogatives. We had fitted up a curtain in the dormitory to isolate them from the rest of us, but I soon noticed that my companions were thinking along the same lines as myself and asking themselves why, under what exceptional law, by virtue of what inadmissible principle, should Mouche, who seems uninhibited by any principles, be faithful to her lover, when women of higher social standing are not faithful to their husbands? Our assessment of the situation was accurate, as we soon discovered. Our only regret was that we hadn't made it earlier and so wasted precious time. Mouche was unfaithful to Nacanel with all the other sailors of the Foile à l'Anvers. She did this without any difficulty, without any resistance, the first time each of us asked. Heavens, how shockingly prudish folk are going to find this, but why? Is there a single fashionable courtesan with a dozen lovers? And is there a single one of those lovers stupid enough not to know it? Isn't it the done thing to have a regular evening with some famous, much-sought-after woman, just as one has a regular evening at the opera, the Théâtre Français, or the Odeon, now that they are putting on the minor classics? A dozen men club together to keep a cocotte who finds it difficult to make fair distribution of her time, just as a dozen men will club together to buy a racehorse ridden by a single jockey, the perfect symbol of the real lover. For reasons of delicacy, we left Mouche to Nacanel from Saturday evening to Monday morning. The days on the river were his. We deceived him only during the week, in Paris, far from the Seine, which for boating men like us was almost tantamount to not deceiving him at all. The odd thing about the situation was that the 4 men filching Mouche's favors knew all about the sharing of those favors, talked about it amongst themselves, even made veiled allusions to it in her presence, which made her roar with laughter. Only Nacanel seemed not to know anything about it, and his ignorance of the situation produced a sort of awkwardness between him and us. It seemed to set him apart, isolate him, and destroy our former trust and intimacy. It gave him, in our eyes, a difficult and rather ridiculous part to play, the part of a deceived lover, almost that of a husband. However, as he was extremely intelligent and had a dry sense of humor, we sometimes wondered rather uneasily whether he might not have his suspicions. He took care to enlighten us in a way which was painful for us. We were on our way to Bougival for lunch, and we were rowing hard when Latoque, who had the triumphant look of a contented man that morning and seated beside the helmswoman, seemed to be pressing up against her rather too freely for our liking, suddenly called out, "Stop!" The 8 oars rose out of the water. Then, turning to his neighbor, he asked, "Why are you called Mouche?" Before she could answer, Nacanel, who was sitting in the bows, said dryly, "Because she settles on all sorts of carrion." At first there was an embarrassed silence, followed by a general inclination to laugh. Even Mouche was dumbfounded. Then Latoque gave the order, "All together." The boat moved forward again. The matter was closed, the mystery cleared up. This little incident changed nothing in our habits. Its only result was to restore cordial relations between Nacanel and ourselves. He became once more the privileged possessor of Mouche from Saturday evening until Monday morning, his superiority over the rest of us having been firmly established by this definition, which incidentally put a stop to all questions about the name Mouche. From then on we contented ourselves with secondary role of grateful and attentive friends who took discreet advantage of weekdays without there being any sense of rivalry between us. Everything went well for about 3 months. Then all of a sudden Mouche began to behave strangely with us all. She was less high-spirited and became edgy, ill at ease, almost irritable. We kept asking her, "What's the matter with you?" She would answer, "Nothing. Leave me alone." We learned the truth from Nacanel one Saturday evening. We had just sat down at the table in the dining room which Barbichon, the proprietor of our pothouse, reserved for us in his establishment. And after finishing our soup, we were waiting for the fried fish when our friend, who also looked a little worried, took Mouche's hand and then began speaking. "My dear friends," he said, "I have something very serious to tell you which may lead to some lengthy discussion, but we'll have time. We'll have time for that between courses. Poor Mouche has given me a disastrous piece of news, which she has asked me to pass on to you. She is pregnant. I have only 2 things to add. This is no time to leave her in the lurch, and any attempt to find out who's the father is forbidden." The first effect of this news was utter amazement. A sense of disaster. We looked at one another as if we wanted to accuse somebody, but whom? I've never felt as keenly as I did at that moment the unfairness of that cruel jest in natures, which never allows a man to know for certain whether he is the father of his child. Then, little by little, we came to experience a comforting sense of consolation, born, oddly enough, of a vague feeling of solidarity. Tomahawk, who rarely ever spoke, expressed this growing serenity in the following words: "Well, it can't be helped, and union is strength." A boy came in from the kitchen with the gudgeon. We didn't pitch into it as we usually did, because when all was said and done, we were rather upset. Nacanel went on, "In these circumstances, she has been good enough to make a full confession to me. We are all equally guilty. Let's shake hands on it and adopt the child." This proposal was unanimously accepted. We raised our arms above the dish of fried fish and swore a solemn oath. "We'll adopt it." Then, suddenly realizing that she was saved and relieved of the horrible weight of anxiety which had been burdening her for a month, that sweet, crazy victim of love exclaimed, "Oh, dear friends, you're so kind, so very kind. Thank you all." And for the first time in our presence, she burst into tears. From then on, we would talk about the child in the boats as if it had already been born, and each of us showed an exaggerated degree of interest in the slow but regular swelling of our helmswoman's waist. We would stop rowing and ask, "Mouche?" She would reply, "Present." "Boy or girl?" "Boy." "What will it be?" "What will he be?" Then she would give free rein to her imagination in the most fantastic way, telling us endless stories, astonishing accounts of the child's life. From the day of his birth to his final triumph, he was everything, that child, in the innocent, passionate, touching dreams of that extraordinary little creature who now lived chastely among the 5 men she called her 5 papas. She saw and described him as a sailor discovering a new world bigger than America, as a general winning back Alsace and Lorraine for France, as an emperor founding a dynasty of wise and generous sovereigns who would give our country lasting happiness, as a scientist finding first the secret of making gold and then that of eternal life, and as an aeronaut devising a method of traveling to the stars and turning the infinite reaches of space into a vast promenade for mankind, thus making all men's most improbable and magnificent dreams come true. Heavens, how sweet and amusing the poor thing was until the end of that summer. It was on the 20th of September that her dream was destroyed. We were rowing back after lunch at Maisons Lafitte, and we were passing Saint-Germain when she said that she was thirsty and asked us to stop at Le Pec. For some time past she had been growing heavy, and this annoyed her dreadfully. She could no longer skip around before us or leap from the boat to the bank as she was used to doing, but she tried to. In spite of all we said or did to stop her, she would have fallen a score of times if our arms had not been waiting to catch her. That day she was rash enough to try to leave the boat while it was still moving, in one of those displays of bravado which sometimes proves fatal to sick or tired athletes. Just as we were coming alongside, before we could guess what she was going to do or stop her, she stood up, took a spring, and tried to jump onto the quay. But she was not strong enough, and it reached and just touched the stone edging with one foot. She slipped, struck her belly against the sharp corner, and with a loud cry disappeared into the water. All 5 of us dived in together and brought out a poor fainting creature, deathly pale and already suffering terrible pain. We carried her as quickly as we could to the nearest inn and then sent for the doctor. During the next 10 hours her miscarriage lasted. She bore the appalling agony with heroic courage. We stood around miserably, sick with worry and fear. Finally she was delivered of a dead child. And for a few more days we had serious fears for her life. At last the doctor told us one morning, "I think she's over the worst. That girl must be made of iron." And we all went into her room together, our hearts bursting with relief. Speaking for us all, Nathanael said to her, "You're out of danger, Mouche dear, and we're all delighted." Then for the second time we saw her cry. With her eyes swimming with tears, she stammered, "Oh, if you only knew, if you only knew! I'm so unhappy, so unhappy. I'll never get over it." "Over what, Mouche dear?" "Killing him, of course, for I did kill him. Oh, I know I didn't mean to, but I'm so unhappy all the same." She burst out sobbing. We stood around her, deeply moved, not knowing what to say. She went on, "Did you see him?" With one voice we answered, "Yes." "It was a boy, wasn't it?" "Yes, and beautiful." We hesitated. Petit Bleu, who had fewer scruples than the rest of us, made up his mind what to say. "Very beautiful." This was unwise of him, for she started moaning, almost howling with despair. Then Nathanael, who perhaps loved her more than any of us, hit on a wonderful idea to calm her down. Kissing her tear-dimmed eyes, he said, "Cheer up, Mouche dear, cheer up. We'll make you another one." The sense of humor which was in her very bones suddenly came alive, and half convinced, half laughing, with tears still in her eyes and her heart full of pain, she looked around at all of us and asked, "Honest?" And we answered as one man, "Honest."